Nah. The moment I stepped off that stage, my phone lit up with 17 missed calls from my brother. Not congratulations. Not we're so proud of you. 17 missed calls back to back starting at 2014 p.m., right around the time I would have been walking across that stage in my cap and gown, shaking hands with the dean. Finally holding the nursing degree I had spent 4 years bleeding for. I stood in the parking lot of the convention center in Columbus, my diploma tucked under one arm, and I just stared at the screen. 17 calls. And one text from my mother that said, "Call us. It's about your sister. It's serious. I want to back up a little, because if I just tell you what happened that afternoon, you won't understand the weight of it. You'll think it was one bad day. It wasn't one bad day. It was the final page of a story that had been written long before I was old enough to read it. I grew up the middle child in a family of 3 girls in Dayton, Ohio. My older sister, Tara, was the one everyone talked about at the dinner table. She had this personality that filled up a room, loud, magnetic, the kind of person who could walk into a party knowing nobody and leave with 15 new best friends. My parents adored her for it. My father especially. He would sit at the head of the table and laugh at every story she told, even ones that weren't that funny, like the sheer fact of her talking was entertainment enough. My younger sister Zoe was the baby. She got the softness that comes with being the youngest, the extra patience, the second chances, Zoe's just like that. Every time she did something the rest of us would have gotten grounded for. And then there was me. I was the one who got good grades quietly, the one who didn't cause drama, didn't need to be managed, didn't demand anything from anybody. My parents called me the easy one, and for a long time I thought that was a compliment. It took me until my mid-20s to understand that in my family, easy just meant invisible. Tara was 2 years older than me and had dropped out of community college after 1 semester to pursue what she called her entrepreneurial vision, which mostly involved selling handmade candles on Etsy and asking my parents to front her inventory costs. They always did, without question, without hesitation, without asking her to pay them back. When she wanted to move into a nicer apartment in Cincinnati, my father co-signed the lease. When her car broke down, my mother gave her $3,000 to replace it. When her candle business stalled and she decided to pivot to selling vintage clothing, they floated her for 6 months without blinking. I never asked them for a single dollar in college. I worked 22 hours a week at a coffee shop, took out federal loans for the rest, and kept my GPA at 3.8 because I knew that a scholarship renewal depended on it. I did all of this without complaint because I believed, genuinely believed, that one day they would see it, that the diploma would be the moment everything shifted, that I would walk across that stage, and they would finally look at me the way they always looked at Tara. I had been planning my graduation day since January. I picked the restaurant, a nice Italian place downtown that took reservations, the kind with cloth napkins and a real wine list. I made the reservation for 6 people. I sent my parents the date, the ceremony time, the parking information, even a link to the venue's website. My mother said, and I quote, "We'll be there, honey. This is your big moment." My father said he was going to take the day off work. Tara said she'd drive up from Cincinnati. 3 weeks before graduation, Tara announced she was throwing herself a business relaunch party on the same day. When my mother told me, she framed it like a scheduling inconvenience. It's the same weekend, isn't that funny? Like it was a coincidence. Like Tara hadn't known my graduation date for 4 months. I told my mother it was fine. I told her there was no way the whole family would miss my graduation for a backyard party, and I believed it when I said it. I was wrong. The week before graduation, my mother called to tell me they weren't coming. The exact words she used were, "We're stuck, sweetheart. Tara's been planning this for months, and she really needs us there." I asked her what that meant for my graduation. She said, "Your brother-in-law is recording the ceremony, right? We can watch together when you come home." My brother-in-law was not recording the ceremony. I didn't even have a brother-in-law. She was thinking of someone else's life, not mine. I hung up and sat on the edge of my bed in my apartment for about 20 minutes. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there with this strange, hollow feeling in my chest, like something had been scooped out and the edges hadn't caught up yet. My roommate, Kelsey, knocked on my door and asked if I wanted to watch something. I said sure. We watched 2 episodes of a cooking competition show, and I don't remember a single thing about either of them. The day before the ceremony, my mother texted me a photo of the dress she had bought Tara for the party. It was a yellow sundress. Really pretty. She sent it with a string of heart emojis and, "Doesn't she look gorgeous?" She did not send me anything about my graduation. I showed up to the Columbus Convention Center the next morning with Kelsey and my friend Dina, who had driven 3 hours from Pittsburgh because she said there was absolutely no world in which I was walking across that stage alone. I love her for that. I will love her for that for the rest of my life. The ceremony was 2.5 hours long. I sat in alphabetical order with my cohort, surrounded by people whose families were filling the seats behind them, and I focused on breathing. When they called my name, I walked up, shook the dean's hand, accepted my diploma, and smiled for the school photographer. Kelsey and Dina were somewhere in the crowd cheering. I could hear them. That helped. Afterward, we took pictures outside. I was still in my cap and gown, holding my diploma up, squinting into the afternoon sun, when I checked my phone for the first time in 3 hours. 17 missed calls from my brother. The text from my mother. I called my brother back. He picked up on the first ring and said, "Something happened to Tara. She needs surgery." Tara had been at her own party when it happened. From what my brother explained, she had been drinking since early afternoon. It was her party after all, and sometime around 4 p.m. she slipped off the back deck. She fell about 8 feet onto the stone patio below, broke 2 ribs, fractured her wrist, and hit her head badly enough that the paramedics wanted her evaluated for a traumatic brain injury. She was at St. Rita's Medical Center in Lima. She was stable, conscious, in pain, and terrified. And my parents needed me to come, not just to be there emotionally. They needed me because, as my brother explained with the careful tone of someone delivering a message they didn't write, Kara's health insurance had lapsed 3 months earlier. She had let it go because the premiums were too much, and she was going to re-enroll when the business picked back up. And the hospital was estimating somewhere between $40,000 and $55,000 in bills depending on whether surgery was required. My parents did not have that kind of money. Or they had some of it, but not all of it, and certainly not on short notice. They knew I did. I had spent 4 years saving. Every extra shift at the coffee shop, every birthday check from my grandmother, every tax refund. Every month I chose not to buy something unnecessary. It had all gone into a high-yield savings account that I was earmarking for one thing, a down payment on a condo and enough runway to launch my nursing career without financial panic. I had $58,000 in that account. My parents knew because I had mentioned it once, proudly, at Christmas dinner. I had said, "I'm finally starting to feel financially stable." I had been so pleased with myself. My brother said, "Mom and Dad were hoping you might be able to help cover Tara's bills. They'll pay you back." I was still standing in the parking lot of the convention center. I was still wearing my cap and gown. My diploma was still under my arm. I said, "I'll call you back." I drove back to my apartment with Kelsey. We were supposed to go to dinner. I had made a reservation at a French bistro, just the 3 of us, a consolation dinner in place of the family celebration that hadn't happened. I sat in the passenger seat and stared out the window and thought about the $58,000. I thought about Tara lying in a hospital bed in Lima. I thought about the yellow sundress my mother had texted me. I thought about the parking information I had emailed my parents in February that they had never used. Kelsey asked if I wanted to talk about it. I told her what my brother had said. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she said, "What are you going to do?" I didn't answer her. Not because I didn't know, but because I was still deciding whether to trust what I knew. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed and ran through every version of this in my head. The version where I give them the money, and everyone is grateful, and Tara recovers, and something in her family shifts. My parents finally see what I gave up. Finally recognize what I have always been to them. The version where I say no, and Tara faces a mountain of medical debt, and my parents spend the rest of their lives telling the story of how I turned my back on my sister when she needed me most. The version where I give the money and nothing changes, and in 2 years, I'm still the invisible one at the dinner table while Tara launches her 3rd business idea and my parents talk about how resilient she is. I knew which version was true. I had known for years. I just kept hoping the story would rewrite itself. At 6 a.m., I called my mother. She answered immediately, which told me she hadn't been sleeping either. I told her I would help, not because I wasn't angry. I was furious in a way that felt almost physical, like something burning in my sternum. But because I could not sit with the image of my sister in a hospital bed and do nothing. Whatever Tara was, whatever our parents were, I could not do nothing. That is just who I am. But I had conditions. I told my mother I would wire $40,000 to help cover the primary expenses. I told her that I expected this documented as a loan, with a written repayment agreement signed by both Tara and my father. I told her that the remaining balance was Tara's responsibility to arrange with the hospital. They do payment plans. Every hospital does. And if she needed help negotiating that, she could talk to the hospital's billing department herself. I was not a blank check. I was not an ATM. I was a person who had worked exceptionally hard for 4 years and had been rewarded for all of it with 17 missed calls on the most important day of my life. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We really appreciate this, honey." She did not say she was sorry for missing my graduation. She did not say anything about the dress she had sent me a photo of, or the party, or the parking information I had emailed in February. I said, "I know." And I hung up. I wired the $40,000 the following week, after my father emailed me a signed repayment agreement, $500 a month, starting in 90 days. My brother helped draft it, bless him. He had driven from Dayton to Columbus to spend that graduation evening with me, showing up at my door at 7 p.m. with a bottle of wine and a grocery bag full of ingredients to cook dinner. He made pasta from scratch in my tiny kitchen and didn't mention Tara or my parents once unless I brought them up. He just cooked and talked about his kids and let me exist in the relief of feeling like someone in my family actually saw me. I did not go to Lima to see Tara in the hospital. I sent the money and I stayed in Columbus and I let my parents and my brother handle the rest. Tara needed surgery, a minor orthopedic procedure for the wrist, and she recovered. Within a few weeks, she was posting photos of herself on Instagram again, smiling in various locations, a new aesthetic emerging. I noticed she had pivoted from vintage clothing to curated lifestyle content. The comment sections were full of people saying she was an inspiration. I unfollowed her. Not dramatically. I didn't make an announcement, didn't block her, didn't send a final text. I just quietly removed her from my feed because looking at her face every morning was costing me something I couldn't afford to keep spending. Over the next few months, my parents called occasionally. My father called twice to check in, and both conversations were stiff and short. The kind where you can feel the thing neither of you is saying, taking up all the air. My mother called more often, and she had a way of talking around what had happened without ever actually addressing it, filling the space with updates about the garden and questions about my work schedule and observations about the weather in Dayton. I answered when I could. I kept things civil. I did not bring up my graduation, and neither did she. The repayment agreement held for exactly 3 months. The $500 payments came in, small and on time, and I thought maybe I had been wrong about them. Maybe this was the beginning of something different. The fourth payment didn't come. I waited a week. Then 2. Then I sent a text to my father asking about it, and he responded 3 days later saying that things had been tight and they'd get back on track soon. I sent one reminder. Then I stopped. I moved the balance from my mental ledger into a category I called the cost of learning, and I let it go. Not because I didn't care about the money. I did. I do. But because continuing to chase it was keeping me in a story I was trying to leave behind. Some debts don't get repaid in cash. Sometimes you just have to decide what the lesson cost and whether you can afford it. I want to tell you about the apartment. In November of that year, about 6 months after graduation, I moved to Denver. I had been applying for positions since August, and a hospital in the Cherry Creek neighborhood offered me a med-surg position with a salary that made me grip my phone with both hands when I read the offer letter. I accepted within the hour. I gave my notice in Columbus, packed my car and a moving truck, and drove west with Kelsey, who had decided spontaneously, beautifully, that she had always wanted to see the Rockies. We drove through Kansas at sunset, and I remember looking out at all that flatness and thinking about how strange it is to outgrow a life. Not dramatically, not with a bang, but just quietly and steadily. The way a plant gets too big for its pot and you have to repot it or it stops growing. I found a 1-bedroom in a neighborhood called Wash Park. Wood floors, south-facing windows, a little balcony where I put a chair and a plant, and started drinking my morning coffee outside when the weather was good. It was the first place I'd ever lived that felt fully mine. Not a dorm room, not a shared apartment, not a temporary arrangement. Mine. I told my mother about the move after I'd already signed the lease. She seemed surprised I hadn't told her sooner. I didn't explain why. I have been in Denver for almost 2 years now. I work on a floor that runs fast and hard and asks a lot of me every single shift. And I love it in the way you can only love something that is genuinely difficult. I have made friends here, real ones. the slow-building kind that come from working alongside someone in high-pressure situations until you know them by their instincts, not just their social media personality. I have a savings account that is rebuilding. Slowly, steadily. I am not where I was before, the $40,000 left to mark. But I am moving forward, and I am building something real. My relationship with my parents is something I would describe as polite and limited. I call on holidays. I visited at Christmas last year, 3 days, and it was fine in the way that things can be fine without being good. Tara was there. She and I exchanged pleasantries and stayed on opposite sides of the room, and nobody pretended otherwise. She never mentioned the money. I didn't expect her to. My parents never apologized for missing my graduation. I waited for it for a long time in that background way where you're not consciously waiting, but you notice every time it doesn't happen. I've stopped waiting. Not because I think what they did was okay. It wasn't. It was a specific and deliberate kind of wound. But because I understand now that an apology from people who don't recognize the harm isn't really an apology. It's just words in the shape of one. And I would rather have the truth than a comfortable fiction. What I have instead is this: a clear understanding of who I am and what I am worth that I did not have before. I know what I can survive. I know the difference between the family you're born into and the family you build. Kelsey is family. Dina, who drove 3 hours from Pittsburgh to stand in a crowd and cheer for me, is family. My brother, who showed up with wine and pasta dough and asked nothing of me, is family. The day I got my nursing license in Colorado, I framed it and hung it on the wall of my apartment, right next to my graduation photo. The one where Kelsey and Dina are on either side of me and we're all squinting into the sun and grinning like idiots. It's the photo that makes me happiest, not despite who's missing from it. Maybe a little bit because of it. I don't feel sorry for myself about any of it. I tried that for a while, the grief of it, the particular ache of wanting your parents to show up and having them not. And it didn't serve me. What serves me is this: I made the harder choice at every turn. I chose integrity when it cost me. I helped someone who hadn't earned it because I couldn't live with myself otherwise. And then I built something beautiful on the other side. I didn't need their applause. I just needed to walk across that stage. And I did. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since everything that happened. Not in a dramatic way. I'm not someone who replays things obsessively. But in the quiet, honest way you think about things when you finally have enough distance to see them clearly. Here's what I know. The people who showed up for me were the people who had always showed up. Kelsey, who knocked on my door the night before graduation just to check in. Dina, who drove 3 hours from Pittsburgh without being asked. My brother, who showed up with pasta dough and wine and didn't need anything from me in return. None of that was an accident. Those relationships were built over years of small, consistent choices. Showing up, following through, treating me like I mattered. The result of those choices was trust. Real trust, the kind that holds. And on the other side of that, my parents chose Tara's party over my graduation, and the result of that choice was that when they needed something from me, something significant, something that cost me real money and real peace, I had almost no emotional reserve left to give them. I gave anyway, because that's who I am. But I gave from a place of exhaustion rather than love. That's what years of being the invisible one produces. Not hatred, not drama, just a quiet, permanent depletion. Tara let her health insurance lapse because she assumed someone else would handle the consequences. And someone did. I did. But the result of that pattern for her is that she never learned the skill of preparing for hard things. She's still out there, pivoting from one idea to the next, letting the people around her absorb the impact of her choices. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I say it with a kind of sad clarity. She was never taught that her choices had weight. That's not entirely her fault, but it is entirely her problem to solve, and it won't be solved until she's the one standing in the wreckage without someone else to call. What I learned, and I mean really learned, not just intellectually understood, is that integrity is not about being rewarded for doing the right thing. I did the right thing repeatedly for years. I worked hard, asked for nothing, saved carefully, showed up for people who didn't show up for me. I was not rewarded for it, at least not by the people I wanted it from most. But I became someone I respect. I became someone who could look at a $40,000 decision in the worst moment of her life and make a clear-eyed choice based on her values rather than her anger. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. The nursing license on my wall isn't just a credential. It's proof of what sustained effort produces when you refuse to let other people's indifference define your ceiling. I built something real out of years of being underestimated, and no one can take that back. Not Tara. Not my parents. Nobody. I think the hardest and most useful thing I ever did was stop waiting for acknowledgement from people who had already shown me again and again that they couldn't give it. The moment I stopped waiting, I had so much more energy for the people and the work that actually deserved it. That's not giving up. That's just finally understanding where to put your effort. Denver is cold in the winter, and I love it here. My savings are rebuilding. My floor at the hospital is hard and fast, and I am good at my job. I have people in my life who show up. That's the whole story, really. That's what it comes down to in the end.